For the first 5 minutes, we're going to have a call to order and introductions of the folks up here. Then for the next 10 minutes, we're going to review and approve the draft minutes from our last meeting on May 31st. And then for the next 45 minutes, the authority will discuss the energy storage study, RFI, broader RFI outreach, and next steps. That'll take us to about 2:30 or so, and then at 2:30, the authority will adjourn, and if we finish up earlier, then we'll adjourn a little earlier, but we'll plan on ending no later than 2:30, and at that, when we adjourn, authority members are encouraged to remain for the transition to a topic-focused public listening session to receive public comments specific to authority work and other input to inform development of the 2018 Virginia Energy Plan. So I expect a lot of you in the audience are here for the Virginia Energy Plan discussion, and that should take place no later. We should start that no later than 2:30. So with that, I'd like to invite folks, starting with Ken, to introduce themselves.
Ken German, Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy.
Hayes Fromme with Orsted.
Andrew Lamar Consulting.
Brian Gordon with the Apartment and Office Building Association.
Will Gathright with Tumalo.
Cleaner Rob with Christian Barton.
Paul Duncan, GSD Energy Associates.
John Hillis, Sol UNESCO.
John Rust, I'm an attorney in Fairfax.
Ken Hutchison, Principal of Old Dominion Public Affairs.
John Warren, DMME.
Paul Kugelman, Attorney General's Office, Counsel to the Authority.
All right, so what I'd like to do now is for the authority members to turn to the first order of business, which is the review and...
Cleena.
Yes? Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, there's two folks on the phone.
I think there's a couple of us on the phone.
Yes, yeah, go ahead, Catherine.
Hi, this is Catherine Baum, Dominion Energy, and I will also just forewarn folks that I'm on a family vacation at the beach in North Carolina, so if you hear the occasional screaming child in the background, don't worry.
Fair warning. Okay.
And Cody Nystrom with us, Ventures on the line as well.
All right, so we've got two members that are joining us by phone today. All right, so the first order of business is for the review and approval of the draft minutes from our May 31st meeting. These were sent to the group on June 12th. So are there any, is there a motion to approve, are there any changes to the minutes before I entertain a motion to approve? For those of you in the audience, we talked about the status of the authority website. We had an update from our counsel to the authority on our ability to collect, hold, and expend funds. We had election of our vice chair, and then we had discussion of an energy storage study, and then we also discussed a work plan development. Next up was discussion of the annual report, which we give each fall, discussion of website content, discussion of public access and engagement. There are no public comments, and the meeting adjourned at 11:30. So are there any, yes?
I would move approval with one very small amendment. That's second to last page, the bottom line. There's reference to storage sitting and permitting. I think it's exciting. I move approval with that one small.
All right, so we have a motion to approve with the edit of, instead of saying storage sitting, we'll say storage siting.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, it passes unanimously. The next order of business on our agenda is the discussion of the energy storage RFI, request for information, what we'll be doing to get outreach for that RFI, and next steps. So in your packet, you'll see a document that starts out with greetings. The notion is that we have basically, we've been appropriated in the General Assembly budget $50,000 in fiscal year 2019 and $50,000 in fiscal year 2020 to conduct an energy storage study. The budget language, and I'll read this out for those in the audience, out of this appropriation, $50,000 for the first year, $50,000 the second year from the general fund shall be used for the Virginia Solar Development Authority, working with the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy to conduct a study to determine whether or not future legislation in the form of regulatory reforms and incentives will prove fruitful in encouraging emergency energy storage capacity in the Commonwealth. So DMME staff assists the authority, and what DMME staff has put together for our consideration is an RFI, or request for information, that we can send out to interested parties who will help us inform the language that we will then use to, as an RFP for the money that's to be used for, in these 2 years for the study. So I'm looking now for feedback on the RFI language. And I can start off. Let me see. We have the next to last paragraph on that first page of the document that says greetings. It says, if so, please send your comments. I would suggest moving that, please send your comments up to the top so folks will know at the beginning that the reason they're getting this is we'd like them to give us feedback. And I would also suggest that we ask for a date certain for that feedback.
Could I just ask, is the purpose of this to gather information that's going to inform the study, or is it to have someone to participate in the study?
It's to gather information to help inform the study. So before we send out the RFP for the study, we'd like to make sure that we're framing our questions the right way.
Well, then it seems to me that the paragraph with the bullets in it seems to be requesting a scope of your experience as opposed to what you would ask us to look at in the study. And maybe we ought to rephrase that so we're actually asking them what areas should we be studying, what are the important things for us to look at.
Fair enough. So you're looking at, does your organization have expertise or experience expertise?
In other words, rather than asking them, do they have expertise in legal and regulatory issues, ask what legal and regulatory issues should our study look at?
Okay.
I assume that we're targeting specific entities to issue this RFI to, correct? We've already decided, and we were in the process of deciding who we're going to issue that to.
Right, that's part of the exercise we're doing
We're
today.
pre-qualifying them, so yeah.
Yeah, so what I'd like to do today is have us provide guidance on who we should be sending this out to. Now, Ken, I believe we've sent it out preliminarily to some parties?
Yeah, we sent it out to a smaller subset that we got from CIT up in Northern Virginia, of people who we thought might have subject matter expertise, just to kind of give it an initial smell test. And so far I've gotten back mostly just out of office replies, welcome July. But I did include one comment we got back from UVA that I left on top of your folders there, so.
Right, so do you have the list with you of who the initial draft was sent to?
I do not have that with me.
Okay.
But I can provide that to everyone.
Sure.
We can cross-reference it, because I'm thinking that you all probably have additional contacts that you might want it sent out to. And
Okay, so once we get so basically a small handful of folks have already gotten a preliminary draft of this. What we'd like to do is send out, refine it as we're discussing here, and then send out that refined draft to a larger body of folks. And so what we can do is get the list from Ken that has already gotten that initial draft, and then inform him as to, suggestions for who else to send this out to. comment on the one piece of feedback we did get, other than folks being out of the office, was the University of Virginia indicated that adding some words to the short description would be helpful. They talked about adding the term safety. They said this ties into regulatory permitting, but for potential new stationary battery technologies, these requirements would need to be very different, and most of the knowledge and regulations are for the longer history key B acid systems. They also suggested adding the term environmental impact if this, and this is their comment on that, if the storage is in batteries, what is their end fate? If it's pumped hydro, how does it impact water resources for people and aquatic species? The third term they suggested we consider adding is manufacturing. Does Virginia just want to buy energy storage, or does Virginia want to incentivize being a leader in the production as well? And then the fourth term they suggested we add is underutilized resources. Where's there excess power that could be stored and tapped when it's more valuable? And are there vacant buildings that could be used for a flow battery installation So I guess I'm looking for further feedback on this communication and also adding UVA's comments. Jack?
The other thing is that there are a lot of articles now that are talking about the economics of storage overtaking peaker plants and the fact that they will become economic.
Nobody can hear you. That's right. Please,
My mic's on, I apologize, I wasn't close enough to it. There are a number of articles that have come out recently that are basically looking at the economics of storage, indicating if you get below 250 kilowatt hour that you're basically going to be able to compete with peaker plants and perhaps replace those. Could we have something in the study that looks at the economics of storage so we have some idea of what those are? There's a big issue in terms of how long storage will last versus a peaker plant, and we don't have anything that would inform us on that as we went through.
Sure, that makes sense. So as I understand it, the question is, how does storage compete with peaker plants, and what are the economics in terms of?
What are the economics of storage, yes, ma'am?
Right.
And I think, to that point,
And I would also suggest that there should be something along the lines of functionality as well in terms of cycling frequency and so forth.
Okay, Captain, can you repeat that?
I would suggest that there should also be something along the lines of cycling frequency. So it's not just the economics of competing with peaker plants, but the actual functionality and such as cycling frequency, comparing various types of storage to those same facilities.
All right.
and to that point, I think maybe Jack and Catherine are looking at it from the perspective of utilities, commercial customers. I think we need to maybe drill down into the state's utilities demand charges and their tariffs. Maybe I know NREL did a nationwide study on demand charges across the country. I think maybe if we do a similar methodology and just drill down into demand charges for the cooperatives and utilities in Virginia, that would give us a good picture of what the economics could look like in Virginia for commercial customers.
All right.
Do we imagine that these details go into the RFI? I mean, these sound like really good, the starting point for, good sections of the study itself, but I'm not sure we want to put all this into this RFI that goes out, do we? Or is that the intent?
I would request that the RFI at least contain use cases. What we're talking about as far as the customer perspective or the utility perspective all pertains to use cases. And so if they have a specific storage technology that they're looking at, what use cases does it fall into? And that would be a nice response back from them, and we'll get good coverage there.
Oh, you mean from the respondents to the RFI? They say that I am an expert in this particular type of battery system with these use cases. Okay, that's fair.
And I think citing other studies that have been done is helpful also. They can look at those and see whether they apply to what we're trying to do. I don't see there's any harm in saying this is what we were thinking about doing. If they disagree with us, they can disagree.
Right. I guess my preference would be, I take your point that, at what point point do we go from an RFI to an RFP comment, but to the extent, maybe we could provide it as background, but I do think that if we give folks some particular insight as to topics that may be relevant to the RFP, again, we can put it in the background section if we need to, but I guess I'm more inclined to include the detail we've discussed so far rather than leave it out.
I mean, to that point then, do we want to just include the whole language that we have for, our sort of mocked up version of HJ 101 here? Because that touches on all the things that we said here and, much, much more, right? So people really get the full flavor of what we're thinking about studying.
Right, now let's, HJ 101, which is also in our packets. The complication there, as I understand it, and Ken, you can set me straight on this, the resolution itself did not pass.
Correct, the resolution did not pass. I included that marked up copy to show you comparing it to the Maryland legislation, which this thing is directly patterned after. So the yellow highlights are what were removed from the final Maryland legislation, and the remainder is what didn't pass in HJ 101. Now, when you compare either of those to the budget language is pretty wide open on what they're looking for. They're not drilling into any of the details that are in HJ 101, so I think it's up to this group to decide, is there anything from HJ 101 that you want to include that you think is important?
Okay, so as I understand it, when staff prepared this greetings document, this RFI document, you took a look at HJ 101, and then you compared it with this Maryland model. That Maryland model was not as broad as HJ 101. In fact, it did not include the items that are highlighted on this copy of HJ 101.
Correct.
So at least right now, what we're looking at is an RFI draft that doesn't include these highlighted items. So one question before us is it okay to make that exclusion, or are there some of these highlighted items that we think should actually be added to the RFI? And so I think the danger of simply attaching the joint resolution is that the budget language that got passed was very simple.
It was very simple.
Yeah.
Also included in your folder is a Maryland budget analysis of their storage study, and it goes into a little, not more detail, but it's pretty explicit on what their study will include. It's a list of about 12 or 15 items, I think, on page 2 that might be helpful.
Is there anything in the HJ 101 that is in direct conflict with the budget?
No, it's just much, much, much broader.
Okay, so there's no reason why we couldn't include this as an attachment to the RFI.
Well, keep in mind the financial realities also. Maryland was tasked with doing half the work, and they got more than twice the allocation to do that.
Okay.
So there are some realities there that you need to be cognizant of.
And can you explain, there were some items that were highlighted in that attachment and some that were not?
Right, the highlighted items are the language from the Maryland bill that was deleted from the final Maryland bill. If you compare the Virginia HJ 101 to the Maryland bill, they are almost identical, word for word, literally. The yellow is what was removed from the final Maryland legislation that was passed, but remained in HJ 101.
Right, so the reason that, I guess the RFI language, the initial draft was narrower than HJ 101 was because what got passed in Maryland was HJ 101 only skinnier, and Maryland ended up having twice as much money to spend as we did. So the notion is we make our initial cut a little skinnier, that will make the task we're trying to accomplish.
More to the point, the RFI was drafted in light of what the budget language asked for. What do we think would satisfy the budget language?
Which did get passed in Virginia. Yeah.
This is Cody. Back on the RFI and who we're going to be distributing it to. There's been a comprehensive study, I think, now done in Massachusetts and New York, and I know they're doing one now in North Carolina. Do we have the resources to be able to reach outside of the state to get some of this expertise and how they crafted their scope and any lessons learned from their studies?
Different groups, certainly even outside the state, right? We sort of pinpointed a few that would be helpful in this, right?
Right, and those might be the additional folks who receive the RFI. That might be one way of doing that. Again, it just depends on how much detail you want to go into.
Right, and we are, working up against some deadlines. So if you look to the description, the scope of the study, we're looking by December 1st of having a contractor complete a report that assesses and characterizes, and I would add the word existing, Commonwealth's existing physical and intellectual energy storage assets, programs, and policies. Then by June 30th of next year, they're going to complete the report, which is called a desktop study that assesses and characterizes the nature and results or expected results of national and state legislation. In that last paragraph, in the last sentence of the middle paragraph, I would say in the United States. I think we're looking at for models in the United States, not limited to Virginia. And then the end result of all of this is a report that recommends strategies, regulatory reforms, including possible reforms to Virginia's current utility interconnection rules and incentives that would prove fruitful in encouraging emergency energy storage capacity in the Commonwealth. So the end result of the study is meant to be what changes should be suggested for Virginia energy laws and regulations. That's the end result, and this is the timeline that's crafted to achieve that. So it seems to me if we want to get an so if our goal is to have a contractor complete that initial report by December 1st, we're going to have to get the RFP out pretty quickly, which means we have to get this next iteration of the RFI out fairly quickly. So I kind of agree, I guess, with Ken's approach is we can send the RFI to Massachusetts folks, New York folks, and North Carolina folks, but I'm not sure I'd hold up too much getting the RFI out because we need to get the RFP out in order to get a response. I guess a contract awarded before December 1st. So maybe we should talk about timeline. If we want a deliverable under the RFP by December 1st, when do we want to actually award the RFP?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
A clarification question, and I apologize, I wasn't at the last meeting. December 2018 is intended to, that the use of the word contractor there is the contractor that we will award the RFP to?
Correct.
Okay.
And we had discussion at the last meeting about, we've got 50,000 in 2 installments, but we would be well advised to have the initial 50 lined up to be spent before the next General Assembly session starts. So that's part of the rationale that's going on here, is we want it buttoned down in advance of the January 2019 General Assembly session.
What do we think a study like this would take to complete? I'm thinking 6 to 8 weeks. Does that sound reasonable? And work backward from there?
Right.
Okay, so we'd like to have somebody contracted by the end of October.
Okay, so that's October 31st, 2018, award the RFP.
I might aim a little earlier than that, frankly.
I would only give 1 month of.
That's pretty aggressive.
October 1st, September 15th,
September 30th,
September 30th?
just trying to get the discussion.
That's probably more realistic. I mean, we're already into August practically. And then just going through the internal process of, getting an RFP cleared through our folks that could easily run into mid-September.
I would think that if we could, we would want to give the contractor October and November to do their work. So that would be to be able to award by the end of September, which would mean go out with an RFP sometime in August.
So it would be August 15th for going out with it, for issuing the RFP?
We haven't even sent out an RFI yet, so how's that going to happen?
All right, fair enough.
Madam Chair, just a question for the staff. How long do you need to write the RFP, evaluate responses? And then how long do you need how long do you think potential contractors need to respond to the RFP?
Yeah. I would think that they would probably need no more than a couple of weeks to respond to it, and we can limit our comment period. I don't think this is one that's going to, require a whole lot of length between the time that the RFP goes out and the time that the RFP submission deadline is. So, yeah.
If we were to work back from, say, September 30th, what date can we get to that gets everybody comfortable? And I ask that in the context of this RFI. And if we take today, how long do we need to get the RFI out, get responses back, get the staff to absorb and synthesize that can help inform an RFP that in turn would have to go out, that would have to be contracted? Do you see what I'm saying? It feels very, very squeezed to do both an RFI and an RFP and award a contract by September 30th. If the intent of the RFI is to help inform the scope of the RFP.
Well, I think that we could send out an RFI for 2 weeks, and during that time, we could be putting together the front end and all the boilerplate, everything we need for the RFP, other than some specific scope items that we receive from the RFI, and then be able to have that out by the end of August.
Okay.
And then be able to receive the proposals. If we give them 3 weeks, that'll cut it short. It might be the beginning of the first week or so of September, but we should be able to get awards sometime early in September.
Okay, so Madam Chair, one thought, it sounds like there is going to be overlap between and this is not necessarily a bad thing, overlap between the RFI, getting that information out, and getting the RFP out, because that information can help not only inform the scope of the RFP potentially, but also help the actual contractor do his work better. It may be helpful to have staff just do a quick touch with House Appropriations staff or Senate Finance staff who actually wrote the language, and just make sure that we're all on the same page about what the intent of the language was. And if it is a little bit narrower than the entire resolution, or if it was in fact the intent was to look back at the resolution, that may change what the scope of the RFP will look like. Does that make sense? I'm just trying to make sure that we both get the type of information we're trying to get with the RFI, but don't run afoul of this.
I think I might need to ask the question as to what is the rush. I heard that we want to get this first phase done before the next General Assembly session, and was the purpose of that so we could potentially increase our funding source in the next budget cycle? Because if that's the case, it's going to be too late. Any budget request, that's going to be awful late anyway. So I think the idea is, if we're not going to be able to get an additional funding ask into the upcoming General Assembly session, then why do we need to compress this?
I think the notion was we wanted to preserve the funding we had, so we didn't want to.
Swept.
Yeah. So we wanted to have the funding already spent, if you would, so that the General Assembly wouldn't say, well, we gave them money, they're not doing anything with it, so maybe we'll take it back.
Well, certainly the first $50,000 will be obligated long before the end of the fiscal year. You know, the end of the fiscal year is not till June. So, you know, we got till June to spend the first $50,000.
Right, I guess we were just, there's discussion last meeting of, during the session, even though we have till the end of June, the optics would look better if we had a spending plan lined up when the...
Madam Chair?
Yes.
To the director's point, you could conceivably move the December 1 date back at least to the end of December to buy yourself an extra month.
Right.
Perhaps a contractor work on this November, December. We have a little more time to get an RFP.
And it's still in time for the General
Informed with the
Assembly session.
RFI. Yeah, sure.
Sure, so that would mean that instead of by December 1, we'll get a response, that we'll get a report from the contractor, it would be December 31st. Okay?
I'd suggest making the 15th. I don't know, between the 15th and the end of the month. I would think if they're going to submit something, they would have it ready by the 15th of December anyways.
That doesn't buy us much time. Why not just go to January 15th for that reason? I mean, still give us time to get in front of the General Assembly.
And by that point, the money's committed and the work has been done, so I don't think there's any risk of someone taking it at that point.
So the notion is, rather than December 31st, have that first report by January 15th? All right? Okay, so working back from that, we would be awarding the RFP October 15th? Is that?
I think we're back to John's original, which is October. Give them October, November, December. As much of October as we can. 2 months for them to do the work would be November and December.
Okay, so we would be awarding it then October 15th. Right?
I don't think there's any harm in aiming for a shorter launch date.
I think we would be pushed to, we will look to beat those dates. So I think those dates would give us room to work with, but our intention would be to be in advance of those dates.
Right, we need to also build in some time so that you all have a chance to look at the final RFP and have a little back and forth with staff, make sure that it is what you're looking for.
All right, so it seems to me if we've got a January 15th deadline for the contractor to give us a report, what I'm looking for now is a date by which no later than the RFP will be awarded. So what should that award date be?
November 1st would give them 2.5 months. And with Thanksgiving and Christmas, those extra 2 weeks might be good.
That's the latest date, Ken.
Yeah.
Like, we could do it by October 1st if we want.
That's what I was going to say. Why don't we, staff, shoot for beginning of October? And if it slips a little, then we'll deal with it.
But she's...
So the structure we're working off now is we'll ask for the contractor to give its initial report on January 15th, and we will indicate that the RFP will be awarded no later than November 1st. Okay? Yes.
I'm sorry to throw a wrench in everything, but I'm a little uncomfortable with it pushing it back to January 15th. I'm comfortable with January 1st or December 31st. I think
Can you speak into the microphone?
I'm sorry, I mean, it's on. The intent behind doing it before the session, I think, is not just to preserve funding, but also to demonstrate progress. And as I pointed out, we need the ability to review the findings of that report. So I would be a little bit more comfortable with pushing it back up a little bit.
So you're saying January 1st, December 31st?
That would be my suggestion, and I think particularly as this group will want to discuss the findings with leaders, it really also important to have obligations with the General Assembly session that would preclude our abilities to.
Madam Madam Chair, I mean, it's a valid point. One question I would have, and again, I very much apologize for not being at the last meeting. There was a lot that was done. Has anyone had a conversation with the patron of HJ 101, Delegate Toscano, about his expectations, given that the budget language is passed, or any conversations with members of the House Appropriations or Senate Finance Committees who actually put the language in and had the language passed? And I say that primarily to say that if you walk into their office and they say, we understand these things take a little bit of time to ramp up, and so, we can't guarantee anything, but, we gave you $50,000 a year for 2 years. Don't speed things up for the sake of speeding them up. For our sake, do what you have to do correctly. Has anybody had any of those conversations? And really, my question is to staff. Has anybody at staff had those conversations?
We have not. We had several discussions with Delegate Toscano about HJ 101, but Mike, help me, I don't think we've had any discussions since after the session.
Okay.
Okay. My suggestion is that we come out of this meeting with dates that if we need to get things done quickly, we can, with the and give ourselves the flexibility if after further discussions with the patron, we can push them back. But to set deadlines that if the patron says, doesn't give us assurances, that we'll have some deadlines in place. Okay. All right, so we're talking about assuming that we get guidance that suggests we should do things sooner rather than later. So we will authorize staff, and we'll have a motion at the end of this. But presumably the motion would authorize staff to discuss with the patron and to get guidance from them on whether things should be done sooner rather than later. And if that guidance is sooner rather than later, let's go ahead and set some dates for ourselves. All right, so I'm looking now at December 31st for the contractor to get that initial report to us. And so that means we need to look at an award date. So if we have an award date of October 31st, that gives them 8 weeks. And if we have an October 31st award date, what deadline would we want? How much time would we want to review before we award? Would we need 4 weeks?
You've got contract award, right? So you've got review of all the responses, ranking, contract review, award.
And we've also got to corral ourselves, so that.
You're going to have questions coming in from the responders too, so.
I can see weeks.
So I would think September 30th for the responses coming in for the RFPs being due. And that gives us 4 weeks between when the responses are due to awarding it. Heard one input that that's too much time. Does anyone think that's too little time?
You're looking for the responses to the RFP by
Yes.
September 31st?
But we're awarding the RFP on October 31st. So the question is, what's the deadline for responding to the RFP if we have an award date of October 31st?
I think 4 weeks is plenty to review and issue the contract.
I'll have the RFP in by the end of September.
All right, so we're looking at awarding the RFP on October 31st, having responses to the RFP due no later than September 30th, and then now we're at the issuing the RFP. What date do we need for that? Would that be October 30th? Would we give them 4 weeks to respond?
August.
August.
Madam Chair, I think it sounded like staff felt like potential applicants could turn it around in 2 weeks.
Okay, so,
If it's 3 business weeks, that's 15 days.
What does the RFP, if somebody wanted to respond to the RFP, how much work is that? What are we going to ask of these folks? Because that's going to inform that, right? So what, like, if we need, I've seen RFPs that require, like practically a short novel, right, of all these different qualifications and questions and whatnot to respond to. So do we have a feel for how onerous that process is going to be?
Well, that raises a question. Are we pre-qualifying responders? Because if we're pre-qualifying, it takes a lot of that out. Or do we want them to provide an RFP?
It also adds additional time to go through the pre-qualification process.
I would not expect to do a pre-qualification, and I think it'll largely be based on expertise and past experience is how the contractors will be judged. What they've done related to what we're asking and what their field of knowledge and expertise is, that's going to be the largest criteria on scoring.
well, Labor Day is on September 3rd. We could have we could issue the RFP perhaps on September 7th, and then and we're giving them till September 30th to respond. That gives them 1, 2, 3 weeks plus a weekend. That also has the RFP due on a Sunday. Should we make it then due on the Monday, October 1st?
Yes.
Okay. So the RFP responses are going to be due October 1st, and right now we're talking about having the RFP issued by September 7th. All right. So then we've got the question of the RFI, getting the RFI out, which will inform the RFP. So what deadline should we look at, again, assuming that we're advised to go on a fast track here, what should we look at to get the RFI out?
I would suggest that we get the RFI out as soon as possible and not, why would we list all these things that are in the Maryland legislation or that were in HJ 101? We've got that list already. We're soliciting information that's above and beyond this list, so why wouldn't we just be open-ended about that and keep the RFI simple and see what we come back with?
Yeah, I kind of had a similar point of view of kind of if the point is just to solicit as many ideas and thoughts on the RFP as possible, keeping it open-ended, and then that's really our job, is to whittle it down and to make it into something productive and useful. But by listing too many things, it may narrow the focus of the RFI arbitrarily, and also we're delaying and debating when we could probably just get something out quicker if it was shorter and to the point.
All right, because we had discussed at the outset of this discussion providing additional background information, which would have been more detailed. So now are we saying make it open-ended?
I think that's a good idea.
How open-ended are you talking? The current draft that is in your folder is already pretty open-ended?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would be comfortable publishing this essentially this current draft, to the folks that I'm thinking about pushing it out to. Like, these are smart professional folks. They have a good imagination. I think they can come back with something useful.
Okay, so just to clarify, we would not be talking about the economics of storage, the cycling and frequency, the utility demand charges. We would not be including any of that in the RFI that goes out. Is that the consensus?
Again, it depends on, do you want to meet the intent of HJ 101 or of the budget language, which is, what policies?
I don't think the RFI needs to do either, though, does it? Because just like John, the comments that we've heard, that Catherine and John, they could be part of the input, but we don't have to include them in the RFI.
Right. So what I'm ascertaining is the draft of the RFI that we have before us is the draft that we're comfortable going with none done.
Madam Chair, so I want to make sure, because we talked about this before, the way it's written right now, it seems to be asking if your organization has experience and expertise.
Right. So we would make changes to the language that we discussed. So
Okay.
Jack Russ changes about what legislation is needed. My suggestion that we move the request up to the front and that we ask for a date certain, but and then we'd be changing the dates as we talked about here.
Right, and I also think, I agree not being specific about what we want, what we're looking for, but we need to have some sort of guidance as to, we're trying to determine, we're trying to provide a report that will allow the industry to develop more energy storage in Virginia. So, and the economics of that, one way or the other, is a big part of that, whether it makes economic sense to do it or not.
Yeah.
So,
We could do that as a bullet dot, one of those bullet dots.
Okay, so we'll add that to the bullet
I mean, that
dots.
could be considered a barrier, but I guess,
Okay.
Yeah, I think the bullet dots could be broad things of what we're looking for comment on, scope input on.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I know I'm not a member of the authority, but I have something that I hope may help move things along, and I think this is part of what's captured, may being overlooked currently. But I think there is a component of what's in the initial draft that's really requesting, when responding to the RFI, asking whoever's responding to please provide their or their organization's education, training, or experience in developing energy storage, or something more tailored to that, because then that would allow, in my view, staff and the authority to weight what comments you get. So there would be a difference between, anyway, I think.
Right, okay, but so now we've got a tension between that and Jack's suggestion that we should be taking out that tell us your expertise language to asking about what changes in the law are needed.
Why couldn't we just simply do both? State your expertise and let us know what you would suggest as far as scope.
That was where I was ultimately getting.
Okay, so
Thank you.
state expertise and keep. All right. So, okay. So we're going to keep this state expertise concept in here, and then we're going to also say, let us know how you would advise in regards to scope, okay? Director, you had said get the RFI out as soon as possible. Is that sufficient guidance, or do we want to have a target date for getting the RFI out? So there's two things about the RFI. One is the final language, and would the process be that we would direct staff to finalize the language based on this discussion, circulate it amongst the members, or how would we, yes.
I would suggest that we finalize the language in the next day or two, send it to you.
Okay.
And if you as the chair agree with it, that you get it back to us and we send it out.
Fair enough.
Why wouldn't we just send it to everyone and ask everyone to respond back to staff?
Well, we've had this discussion here, that would just delay it. Everybody's had their input, it would make it a lot easier.
Well, you get your response to us by X date, 2 days later, or something like that. And if you're on vacation, then can't respond. Just to make
Okay,
sure
so
everyone...
the notion is that staff would, based on the input in today's discussion, make changes, ask for responses within 2 days, and then based on those changes, maybe run it by chair for final blessing? Okay. All right.
These last, the comments that Jack and Catherine made, I think I understand Jack's comments. I'm not quite clear on Catherine's functionality and cycle.
Yeah, and actually, we have backed off of that.
That's what I was going to ask. Does that come out of this?
Yes,
That's a little detailed.
Yeah, we're backing out of the detailed discussion of cycling and frequency and economics and the utility demand charges. We're backing off of putting that in the RFI.
So one question I got when I was previewing this with some folks is what's going to happen afterwards? Let's say we send out the RFI and they say, oh, this is great, I really want to be a part of it. They send in their qualifications, they send in some comments. What's going to be expected of these folks afterwards as sort of like a next step? Respondents to the RFI.
Well, as I understand it, we'll use responses to inform our RFP, and then then anybody can choose to respond to the RFP, whether or not they've responded to the RFI.
The last paragraph on the first page pretty much says that. Whether you respond or not is not going to impact your ability to bid on an RFP, if there is one.
The other question is who the RFI goes out to. So staff is going to circulate to all the members a list of who it's already, the preliminary RFI draft went out to, and then members will inform staff of additional folks to send the final version of the RFI out to. Right, so when you send out the draft language, you'll remind folks that, you need feedback within 2 days of 2 items. 1, any comments on the revised RFI language, and 2, who we should be adding to the list of folks that have already received the initial draft.
Right, I can send out who it's already gone to today, in fact, and y'all can just respond back, and that way I can be putting together a distribution list.
Right, and of course, when you suggest, if you can provide the contact information to staff, that would be helpful too, so they won't have to hunt it down. All right, so is there further discussion or guidance for staff before I entertain a motion? All right, let me see if I can craft a motion. The motion would be to direct staff to revise the RFI language as discussed during this meeting. So they would incorporate the refinement of the tweaking the language that's in here, not adding the additional detail, but tweaking the language that's in here, reflecting the revised dates that we discussed, sending that revised RFI out to members with a 2-day turnaround response time, making those edits, and then having the chair review those edits before the RFI goes out. So the notion would be to get the RFI out as soon as possible with those tasks in mind. So do I have a motion on the table?
Motion.
A second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right.
Madam Chair, just
Yes.
out of abundance of caution, because of the Freedom of Information Act, please do not share your comments with each other. They need to go directly back to, I think it's Ken as it's designed, and then Ken is going to forward them to the chair for her review. Do not share them with each other, because we run the risk of it being deemed possibly a meeting under FOIA because of discussions among members. So we want to keep that down, and the way we do that is we get it back to staff, and then staff will get it to the chair, and that, no talking among yourselves about it after the meeting, okay? I just wanted to be abundantly cautious.
No, we appreciate that. Now, the other item that was discussed in terms of this process was having a chat with the patron about whether we're proper to work on this accelerated timeframe, or do we have a little more time if needed? So how would we like to proceed in that regard?
Madam Chair, I would suggest that it's a conversation that either the director or staff have with Delegate Escano. I would also strongly encourage a conversation with staff at House Appropriations and Senate Finance, given that that's where this language procedurally is actually coming from.
I would also say that might not even just be the timeline, right? It would be, Delegate Toscano had something in mind when he had this language crafted up. So what would he consider a win? Let's try to get that work done, even despite this exact language not passing, right?
So let me ask, do we need a motion to that effect, or you can do it without a motion?
Yes.
All right.
But just for clarification, I think Hayes' comments are spot on. The language in that's wrapped around the budget language is really the only language that matters and is enforceable and governing. I mean, I think trying to accomplish as much as what Doug at Toscana was trying to accomplish is laudable, so long as it fits within the confines and parameters around what's in the budget language. I don't think we have a scope of authority to go beyond that.
Right, but our RFI goes a little beyond that does not simply replicate the budget language.
Right, but we are kind of governed by what's in the budget language, so I don't want to reopen the RFI conversation, but just...
Yeah, so when we, I guess my suggestion would be when we evaluate the responses to the RFP, we'll be bound by the budget language. Right, I agree. So I guess the next question I'd like before we move on to the Virginia Energy Plan, if we have that discussion with the patron and with the finance folks, and the guidance is don't rush, what guidance what should we do then?
We have another meeting, September 11th, is that right, on the calendar?
We do that, the intent of that was to start working on the annual report, but that can be an agenda item.
Okay.
But, yeah, we'll know from the patrons in the...
Right, so it seems to me that
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I would suggest that we just use that information to our advantage if that opportunity presents itself. That if we have a contractor that feels confident that they can finish by our established deadline, that we pursue it like that, but that if the pressure's off on the deadline and the contractor believes that they can provide a much more quality product if they have longer, then we exercise that opportunity.
Fair enough. So do we need to modify our motion to reflect that?
I don't believe so.
Okay. All right, so is there any further discussion of the energy storage RFI? All right, if there, hearing none, we can now move to the, am I correct, that we can move to the discussion of the 2018 Virginia Energy Plan?
And unless you think there needs to be a formal motion to adjourn the official business of this group?
I guess I'm looking for guidance on that. Do we need to do we need to adjourn officially, or can we adjourn after the input on the Virginia Energy Plan? Is there any reason for us to adjourn prior to the Virginia Energy Plan
Just
discussion?
because I had it in the agenda in case anyone needed to leave, but
The only legal
encourage you to stay.
The only legal distinction that would happen if you adjourned is there could be no more votes by the authority. I mean, because the meeting would be over. So if the authority wants to take up potentially any business after or during the discussion of the Virginia Energy Plan, it should stay convened.
My suggestion is that we treat this Virginia Energy Plan as the public comment discussion of our session, and then we adjourn formally at the end of that. Is it any concerns about that approach? All right. So let's move on to the